But as I got older, there was one thing that always just kept coming to my mind. Do you know what that was? Are we doing this right? I mean, really? Are we doing this right? And, you know, of course, my grandmother would have said absolutely, because that's just the way we've done it for the last 50 years, you know, and I understand that. And I've been with Extension a little over 20 years, so I definitely understand about the times and growing up and doing things the way our family has always done them. But today, we're going to talk about canning. Of course, I only have a very short time with you all, but I am going to talk about safety and the concern for that, because I want you all to feel 100% safe in what you're doing at home, no matter what you're preserving in your home, that you're doing it the safe and most safe way, I guess, and tested way that we have. So, and I'll say questions at the end if you don't mind. So if you can jot those down, I'll be glad to answer those, because I know we only have a short amount of time. So, why canning? Why do you want to can? Anybody?
So you got the same food to eat in the winter that you had in the spring.
Right. We're growing all this great things in our garden, and we want to have that freshness in November and December as what we have in June and July. That's a great reason to can. Any other reasons that why people you know what's in it, right? You know exactly from your own kitchen what you're putting in those canned items in your kitchen. And so when you think about canning and when you choose items that you want to preserve, right, no matter what those are, fruits or veggies, a couple things to keep in mind, and we're talking very basics today. So you want to be able to preserve those items within 6 or 12 hours. So when you're thinking about canning, you don't want to select those items and pick them, especially if you're going to a garden, and let them sit for 3 to 5 days in your refrigerator. I know sometimes you can't help it, and you do have to let them sit a few days, but if you want the best quality and the best product, 6 to 12 hours is what you're looking at to can or preserve those items in the fruits and veggies. Now, the other thing that you want to think about when you're thinking about canning is what items are you canning, first of all. After you decide what that is, which one of these up here are you going to use? So I don't have a PowerPoint today. You all see that because I like to move around, I like to talk with my hands, and I like things to show you all. So when you think about, you've already chose why you want to can, because you want to have those things later in the year. You've chosen what item that is. And so next up is, which canner are you going to use? So that's the next thing you need to think about. So before we get to that, if you don't mind a show of hands, how many have been canning 5 years in here? A couple. Okay, 10? Okay, keep your hands up, those 5 years that raised your hand. So those, if you've been canning 10 years, raise your hand. 15? Okay. Okay, 15, 20, 30, 40 years. Okay, about half the room. Okay, hands down. So who has never canned before? Anybody? A few? Okay, and that's all right. You've got to start somewhere and you've got to learn somewhere. And the one thing I want to talk about is to not be afraid of canning. Canning is a science. You may have heard over the years that it's an art, and indeed it is an art. You will get better and you will get more familiar with it the more times you can, but it is indeed a science because it involves pressure usually, or boiling water, and now steam, and I'm going to show you what they've came up with. This is my new baby that I wanted to show you all today. Or pressure and time combined together, right? So once you decide what you want to can, here's your water bath canner, right? So that's what you like to use is water bath canning? Okay, that's good. That's all right. There's nothing wrong with water bath canning. The simple definition of a water bath canner, for those of you that have never canned before, is simply it is a large pot that you will have. This is just the jar holder that I have in that pot. It's filled with water and placed on your stove where the water completely covers the jars, and you boil those jars for a select amount of time, depending on what you're canning.
And it works.
And it does work most of the time. Now sometimes you might have some products that do not seal, and we'll kind of talk about that and we'll wait for that at the end. So if you were going to water bath can something, what would it be? Throw out a product that you would put in here to can. Jams and jellies, yes. Peaches. Some tomatoes, yes. Some tomatoes are actually required pressure cans now. But yes, some tomatoes can be in the water bath. Good. I heard green beans. You cannot water bath and ensure 100% safety for green beans in a water bath canner. And I'm going to talk about tested recipes towards the end as well. So when you're talking about water bathing items, you're looking at things like tomatoes that have the acidic properties. You're talking about your fruits. You're talking about jams, jellies, preserves, pickles, things that you are just water bathing to make that seal on that compound so that you can have that jar preserved for the next 6 months to 12 months within a year. Green beans is the most talked about canned vegetable out there in many counties, not just here. It's in Putnam County as well. And I've worked in 3 other counties, and it was always green beans, which was a hot topic. So I'm going to go ahead and talk about some of the things with green beans right now, and then we'll move to the pressure canner. The reason that you cannot 100% safely can green beans in the water bath canner is that this is boiling water. And boiling water only reaches 212 degrees. To properly can green beans, because they are not an acidic vegetable, you have to reach 240 to 250 degrees. And the only way you can do that is to add pressure to a canner. And because of the pressure, it increases the temperature to 240. You could boil this for 5 hours, and I'm going to tell you a story on my family. And Chris has known me several years now, since I've been back in the central region. My undergrad is in food nutrition and dietetics, and so usually I don't go to family reunions and eat a whole bunch of stuff because it's been outside sitting out over 2 hours and it's got a bunch of mayonnaise stuff in it, so I'm just going to tell you. So I know it tastes good, but I know what can happen. And my aunt, I dearly love, she is my godmother. I would do anything for her, but she water baths her green beans. I love her to death. I have preached to her for 20 years about that once I knew 100% what the guidelines were and why you had to do it a certain way. And she said, well, I don't know why I boil them for 8 hours. I don't care if you boil them for 24 hours. Boiling temperature, right, was how much? 212. It's not hot enough. And I know that is just my decision. So she quit serving green beans when I come over for dinner because we don't eat them and my kids don't eat them. And that's okay. She knows that. You make your own decision on that. But the reasoning behind the veggies that are not acidic, and there's a few others as well, corn, lima beans, peas, other things, is that if, okay, there's that if in there, right? If there was to be this awful word of Clostridium botulinum, right? Botulism. If there were to be those spores in those green beans, and we canned them the way I just told you, and she water bathed them for 8 hours, she left them out on the counter. They're now at room temperature for 2 weeks. Another 2 weeks go by, we're a month in, and we go to a church dinner. And she decides to serve those. Well, they have set out at room temperature. What happens with botulism is it's the toxin that makes you sick, not the bacteria. And so once that bacteria has set in at room temperature, it starts multiplying, and that bacteria make the toxin. You can't smell it, you can't see it, and you can't taste it. So once you consume it, that's how it makes you sick. And we won't get into everything that it does, but it is a very strong bacteria. And the toxin, it is bad. And if you remember, I know Mary knows this story as well. A long time ago, the Gerber family poisoned and killed 9 members of the Gerber family by green beans. She canned green beans and served them in a cold green bean salad in the summertime to have, and they tasted great until the toxin kicked in. And so that is a very unsightly story, okay? So I'm not focusing on that, but I just do want to tell you how important it is to can properly. And there is a reason, if you ever call your extension office and they say, hey, I want to know how to can whatever, and they say, well, our tested recipe says, and they read that off to you, it's because that is the only thing that we can give out is on tested recipes. And what tested recipes mean when you call the extension office is that these recipes have been tested over and over and over again, and they have came with the same result for 10 times, 12 times. They've gotten the same result each time. So there is no question that it is a safe recipe to use. And so you may have your own recipe at home like my grandmother had for years, and it might be okay. But that's your decision on whether might and if is going to be good enough, you know, for you. And so that's why it is so important to use some of the tested recipes that we have for you and that are available to you at different websites and different places. And I'll show you those in a second. Okay, so that's my story with the green beans and the water bath canner. Next up is the pressure canner. So how many of you in here use pressure canning when you can? Several of you can, so about 5. So sometimes people are afraid of these. I understand you got a lot of pressure, you got a lot of heat. There's a lot to know with the pressure canners, but they can be used, and everyone in this room can do it. The water bath canner, remember your jars went in and they were fully covered with water. Water covered the lid. In the pressure canners, you're only putting 2 to 3 inches of water into the bottom of the canner. You can go by your manufacturer's guide when you're looking at these to see exactly how many it tells you, but basically 2 to 3 inches. And then you're putting in your jars, you're sealing it, and then you're processing it on your stovetop. So there's 2 different types of pressure canners as well. Does anyone know what this one's called, the one I have up here? Jiggler. It is a jiggler. No, that's fine. That's what you call it. Your little jiggles. If it doesn't, you're not canning properly. This is a weighted gauge canner. And you have 3 options. You have 5, 10, and 15 pounds of pressure on this. So all you do when you're canning, and you're going to be canning at 10 pounds, that's going to be the average that you're using right here. I looked up your elevation. You're under 1,000, so you're not changing that. And so you're going to put your 10 pounds of pressure on, and you're going to put this on the stove, and then you're going to hear this jiggling. If this is not jiggling, you cannot start your timing. If it's just sitting there like this, and you don't hear anything, then it is not hot enough, and it has not came to the proper temperature nor pressure to start the timing yet. Okay? This lid, and I didn't bring the other bottom to this because I know you all know what that looks like. This is called a dial gauge, right? Who in here uses a dial gauge canner? Anybody? Just a couple? Okay. The only difference, as you can see on here, you can see the actual numbers. So it will depend on what you prefer. Do you want to just put a weight on it and let it go and listen for the jiggle? Or do you want to heat it up and look at the actual number at what you're canning at? Okay, so if you use this, you're canning at 11 pounds pressure. And you can look on there and read that. And I'm sure those of you that get into the canning college that we're going to do, I'm sure Mary will talk with you about testing these. If you have the weighted gauge canner, there is nothing ever that's going to go wrong with this weighted gauge. You're going to have to replace the seal probably throughout time, but this weight will never go bad. You do not have to do anything with that. This, on the other hand, if you use a dial gauge, just to ensure that it's accurate, you need to have this tested every year. And we can do that at the extension offices for you. It's very simple, very quick, 5 minutes or less, and you'll know what your gauge is reading and whether you can properly can with it or not. So this is really easy to use as well. It just depends what you prefer, whether the weight or whether you want to see the dial gauge. Now, either way, there's a couple things to this, right? So once you put the 2 to 3 inches of water in either canner, and you've got your jars in, and they're ready to go, and you secure the lids on, there is something that you must do that some people forget to do, or some people think, oh, it's done long enough, I'll just go ahead and put that on. Does anyone know what that may be, some of those that have been canning? You do, yes, you do have to time it, but there is something you have to do before this goes on and before this little weight goes on this one. Do you know what that is?
I always let my